Good. Among the people who came back is Leslie Nobile in that list. Oh, very good. Good, very good. I want to make sure. Leslie, you're up. We're resuming. We have two presentations. One is Leslie on the importance of Whois accuracy, and then we'll have Nate Davis, our operations officer, give the software development update.
Okay, everyone, good afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about the importance of maintaining Whois data, the importance of Whois accuracy. This is one of my main focuses in my new role. So I've been working on a project right now for about Whois accuracy across the RIR system. And I recently wrote a blog about it, and I decided to maybe bring it to you all and talk about it here, because there's some important data points I'd like to highlight. So I have some very basic facts about Whois. I'm sure most of you know this, but I just wanted to sort of start by talking a little bit about what Whois is. So it is a query and response protocol. Some people think it's a database. It is actually a protocol. And it's used for querying databases that store registered users or assignees of an internet resource. And that internet resource could be IPv4, IPv6, or an autonomous system number, or a domain name. So RIRs have Whois, use Whois, and domain name registries also use Whois. Whois is used by lots of different people. It's used for good, and it can be used for bad. We're actually going to talk a little bit about both of those things. It's used by network operators. A lot of you are network operators. You know what you use it for. You like to know who's running networks, so you check Whois. It's used by a lot of researchers. They produce lots of different data and reports and studies. It's used heavily by public safety officials, and that is law enforcement. Global law enforcement uses Whois quite often to try to find criminals. And it's also used by many other community stakeholders for a variety of reasons, and as I said, some good and some bad. And the thing about Whois, ARIN's Whois data, is that it is the responsibility of the registrant to ensure the accuracy of their registration records. It is not ARIN's responsibility. It is the registrant's responsibility. So we don't often go after users to update their data. There's only one instance, and I'll talk about that in the presentation, where ARIN is actually pursuing registrants to update their data. And that is because of a policy. So why is it important to maintain accurate Whois data? I just threw out a couple of reasons that came right to the top of my head. Accurate data helps keep the internet safe and secure. Everyone knows who's using number resources, who is responsible for the number resources. It helps to protect your internet number resources from being hijacked. When records are out of date, hijackers are looking just directly for that type of information. They want to see records that have been sitting dormant for years. They love it. It is actually required under your ARIN Registration Services Agreement, the RSA and LRSA. There is a requirement in there in the terms and conditions that you must maintain accurate data and notify ARIN when things change. And quite honestly, it's the right thing to do. We're all global netizens, and it's our responsibility as users of the internet to keep our information accurate. So ARIN is seeing some different trends recently that are affecting Whois data. So this isn't actually new, but we're seeing a resurgence of this. Registration records that have not been updated and maintained have always been the target of hijackers. But with this new IPv4 transfer market, the hijackers are really actively seeking out resources that have not been updated in years. So they have this whole series of checks that they do. They're looking for the dormant records, those that have not been updated in quite some time. They are looking for expired domain names. They're looking for companies that are out of business. They are checking routing to see whether a resource is being routed. So they have all these different checks they do, and they're doing this to determine whether the resources are actually in use. So if they determine that they're really not in use, or they may not be in use, and the registrant is no longer viable, they attempt to take over the organization record and its related resources by pretending to be the actual registrant. And they're quite bold these days, and they're getting a little smarter. In the early days, they weren't quite as smart, and we were stopping a lot of them. These days, they're a little more sophisticated. We see lots of hijacking rings. There's a lot of them that work together. They're not afraid to sign their names on things and pretend they're someone else, and to sign names on sworn affidavits, et cetera, et cetera. So they're pretty ruthless, I guess. So ARIN catches a lot of these, but there are times that we don't catch them. I mean, we just can't stop everything, and like I said, they're a little more sophisticated than they used to be. So if they are successful, the result is that the registrant loses control of its resources and potentially its organization record and its point of contact record as well. So looking at the hijack targets, the typical hijack targets, that would be mostly the legacy IPv4 networks, those that were issued prior to the establishment of ARIN, and that typically don't come in and update their records with ARIN. And one of the reasons, there's many reasons, but these are the records, the networks that are far less likely to have at least one validated point of contact associated with the record. So I need to explain what a validated point of contact is. There's a policy in ARIN that requires every single registered point of contact to receive an email from ARIN every year, and we require them to validate their record, to say, yes, this is good, this is still good, or no, it's not good, and I'll come in and update my record. If they don't validate, they don't respond to our request within 60 days, and ARIN determines that they're not valid and we can't find them, we actually mark their record publicly in Whois as not validated. So that's the policy, that's what it tells us to do. So now I'm going to look down at the pie charts down there. So we have a total of over 50,000 network records in ARIN's database. 26 on the left pie, 26,776 of them are ARIN-issued networks. It says non-legacy, which is probably not the greatest terminology. These are ARIN-issued networks. So of that 26,776, 89% of them have at least one validated point of contact associated with their network record. And 11% of them have no validated point of contact at all, which is actually pretty good, percentages when you look at the totals. But if you look over to the right at the 25,218 legacy networks that are registered in ARIN's database, 55% of them have no validated point of contact at all, and 45% of them have at least one validated point of contact. And I actually think that's better than I expected. When we ran the data, I was kind of surprised. Probably the more interesting thing at the bottom, that in the asterisks, those legacy networks with no validated point of contact, in the darker blue pie on the right where it says 55% legacy networks, there are 345,837/24s within those network records, individual /24s. And in today's IPv4 transfer market, that's a lot of money. And that is exactly what the hijackers are looking for. So what can you do to protect your Whois data? Obviously, we want you to come in and update your data with ARIN. When things change, come in and update your record, whether that's your org record, your point of contact record, your resource record. One of the more important things to do is to make sure that ARIN knows if there's been a merger, acquisition, transfer, or name change. What we see in ARIN is that a lot of companies who do mergers and acquisitions, they forget about ARIN. It's understandable. They're running their business, they're making their money. So they'll come to us 5 or 10 years later to update their record and say, oh, by the way, I had this transfer. I merged with this other company. That means that those records are organization records and resource records are sitting out there completely stale for years, which is bad. So it's stale data. But the other thing is, with the transfer market, a lot of companies come to us to do these transfers, and they aren't able to because their registration records are incorrect. They're still showing the name of the old company instead of the new company that they merged with. So that puts a sort of a damper on pursuing transfers in the market. The second thing you can do, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in the following slide, is to respond to ARIN's annual point of contact validation request. So that was what I was just talking about. It's the policy. We send an email to people, and we ask you to confirm your registration information for your point of contact record. And we actually give you a couple of different options in there. So you can either confirm by clicking on a URL, which a lot of people don't like to do, but as soon as you click the URL, it validates you. You're done. Or you can just write back correct, the word correct, and then ARIN will go ahead and validate your record for you. Or you can go into your own registration record via your ARIN online account through our web portal and update your own data, and that immediately validates you. So you have sort of three options. Yeah, so those are the three options. Looking at POC validation statistics, let's see. I'm going to go down to the data first and not that first, that top thing. So on the left-hand side shows the total number of, there's 228,647 indirect points of contact in ARIN's database. An indirect point of contact is one that received a reassignment from an upstream ISP. So an upstream ISP is typically registering these points of contact. And they don't have their own resources through ARIN, they have them through an upstream ISP. So out of the 228,647 indirects, 90% of them have not validated their point of contact. 90% have not validated their point of contact records, and only 10% have. And mostly it's because they don't know who ARIN is, they don't understand what they're doing, they don't know why they have to validate. They're not receiving a lot of information from ARIN or their upstream about it. So we're trying to put make some changes there. If you look on the right-hand side, 52,004 direct POCs are in ARIN's database. 57% of them have actually validated their point of contact record, and 43% have not. Now, I don't think those numbers are great, and I realize it's because those direct POCs include legacy resources. So anybody who received legacy points of contact, if they have received a direct allocation or assignment from a predecessor registry, they're called a direct POC. So that is including legacy and ARIN records right there, and legacy, as I said, tend not to update the records as often. David, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes?
Hello? There we go. David Farmer, University of Minnesota. Those percentages, is that currently valid POCs or have ever validated?
It's current.
So
this is the current data that we pulled out.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Uh-huh. What's not accounted for here, and I should probably mention, because there's sort of a population of POCs that are not receiving this POC validation. And those are what we call orphan POCs. These are points of contact who are not tied to any resource whatsoever. Typically, those are reassignments that were done by an upstream ISP, and they registered their points of contact in anticipation of issuing them space, or putting in a reassignment record for them, or they put in a reassignment record for them, and then they deleted it and gave it to someone else, but never deleted the point of contact. So there's over 250,000 orphan POCs in ARIN's database. So it kind of mucks up the whole process. So we're working on a project, I am, to start eliminating orphan POCs, and we're setting some business rules, et cetera, and that hopefully will clean up the data just a little bit. Okay, the POC validation process enhancements. So, as I said, not everybody loves the POC validation process. It's fairly simple, but they just don't get it. So we're trying to make some improvements. That's one of my projects. One of the first things we've done, and we've actually already done this 3 times, and I think our latest message was the winner, I hope. We're improving the POC validation messaging that we send out annually to people. And what we did was we worked with registration services and we tried to identify all the points of confusion. And then we rewrote the message so that it addressed every single point of confusion. So we think we've got that down. We're also improving the messaging that we send to all newly registered points of contact. We used to just send a little blurb saying, oh, you're registered in ARIN's database, without explaining anything to them. So now we're telling them who ARIN is, why they've been registered in the database, who they were registered by, and to expect to receive an annual POC validation message to make sure that their record stays accurate. So we're giving them more information, and hopefully they, just a little more clued in. We are creating a new POC consolidation functionality. We see that ISPs tend to, each time they assign a network to, a reassignment to a customer, they re-register a whole new POC in the database. So sometimes we see 5, 10, 20 POC handles for the same person. And there's no easy way to consolidate them right now, so we want to make a tool and make it easy for them to just have one record. Because right now, if they have 20 handles, they're getting 20 annual POC validation messages. So we want to simplify things for them. One of the big things we're doing for ISPs, we're going to make it easier to manage their reassignment data. We have something called SWIP, that's our reassignment tool. It's fairly, it doesn't do a lot. It just adds a reassignment. It doesn't do anything else. So we're working on enhancing that, and we call it SWIP Easy, and that's coming up in Q4, and we're adding more functionality to that SWIP tool to make it easier for ISPs to not only add reassignments, but to delete them, and to delete the POCs if they're no longer valid. So that'll be much better. And then one of the things I'd like to do, I'm still talking about this one, and there's a few other things, but these are some of the highlights. We want to send an annual POC validation summary to ISPs so that they remember how many POCs they actually added themselves through their reassignments, and that they're aware that this annual validation comes up and that they should probably be communicating with their customers, or they should probably be coming to ARIN if those are no longer their customers and deleting those records. So we hope that'll spur them a little to think about that. So what are some specific steps you can take to keep your outdated registration records updated? Well, the easiest thing is to log into your ARIN online account. As I mentioned, that's the ARIN web portal. That's the way you interact with ARIN to update your records. If you don't have one, you can create a new one. And then once you get in there, there's a whole left-hand navigation bar, and it gives you all kinds of options, and you can update anything right there by going through ARIN online. If you don't understand the process or you have any questions, you can send questions to ARIN via the Ask ARIN functionality in ARIN Online, or you can send an email to Hostmaster. We still answer those. And we've actually made it easy to report inaccurate Whois data. This came through a customer suggestion, actually, and they wanted to have a place where they knew if there's bad data, they wanted to be able to report it to ARIN. So we put up a simple web tool. It's on our homepage. It's called the Whois Inaccuracy Reporting. And we would love to, we get emails, we get little reports all the time, and we investigate them. Or you can send an email to hostmaster@arin.net. But the Whois Inaccuracy Reporting is the best way to do it. Okay. So, does any of this work? Are these actions effective? Actually, they are effective, and this is one of the main reasons. Any update you make to a Whois record becomes immediately reflected in the last updated field. So no matter what you're updating, whether it's your POC, your org, your resource, that registration record then shows as last updated yesterday, with yesterday's date, for example. And this lets potential hijackers know that the POC and its associated organization are current, active, alive, and well. Somebody's out there paying attention, watching things. And it can be a significant deterrent to hijackers. They don't want to mess with anything that's being recently updated and watched. They want to look for things that are not being watched and that people have forgotten about. The other thing related to the Whois inaccuracy, ARIN staff does investigate all inaccurate Whois reports, and we do try to obtain some updated information. So we are working this. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Microphones are open for questions.
Scott Lybrand, do you, when you send the initial email to the newly created indirect POCs, do you give them a chance to validate their POC right then, or do you wait till arbitrary?
They don't need to, because that's their first entry into the database.
But they didn't make it.
Huh?
Somebody else made it for them.
Right, but it's valid until the following year. It's done annually.
From your perspective, it may be valid. From the perspective of the person who just got added, it may not be.
It's something to think about. Yeah,
So I would suggest that if you're going to contact them anyway, you put in their first POC validation as that message and ask them to go through the process of telling you whether their ISP is making up crap or if it's actually accurate.
Okay, that's an interesting thing to think about adding. Okay, thank you. Jason?
Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. On the orphaned POCs topic, one of the things that I noticed, which is difficult and people often get wrong, is they'll do a reassign simple, which...
A what? I'm sorry.
A reassign simple.
Oh, yeah.
Which then creates a POC. and then they'll decide, oh, I made a mistake, it's the wrong block, delete that block, or a year later when they're no longer a customer, delete that block, and they never go back and remove the POC.
Exactly.
So is your tool going to say you have just removed the last resource for the following POC? Do you want to delete the POC as well? How is that going to work?
Well, we're working on the business rules right now. We're trying to affect any records that might be viable. So we're putting at least a 1-year time limit on it. We may go to 2 years if it hasn't been updated in one year or 2 years. But we're just sort of developing those rules now, but we're going to be extremely cautious.
It would be much better for ISPs to be able to delete the associated POCs that went with their reassignments. So that's our first priority.
That's one of the things.
So I think what would be helpful to me is when I delete the resource record and have created an orphan POC, to let me know at the time that I'm deleting the record that I'm creating an orphan POC, and make it very easy for me to delete that as well without having to dig in and figure out who that POC is and then delete it as well.
Right. One of the things that SWIP Easy is going to do, it's going to allow you to do that and determine that right then. SWIP doesn't do any of that now. Once we develop SWIP Easy, it's going to allow you to delete anything you need to right then and there.
Will the template also be modified so that I can say if this is the last block, remove the POC as well?
I don't know about the template. We haven't gotten there yet. That's Q4.
That's Q4.
Can you ask me at the next meeting?
Sure.
Thanks. Thanks, Jason. Kathy?
Hi, Kathy Aronson. I just want to say that for all the years that we've tried to make policy to make to make the database better, I just think this is awesome. I just wanted to say that. I just think this is great, and it's going to make such a difference.
Thanks, Kathy. Janine?
Hi, Janine Goodman with Avenue 4. I just want to make a comment on your comment about how legacy holders are not making the 8.2 requests, which is also leading to kind of inhibiting the transfers. And one of the things we're seeing in having conversations with these sellers is that one of the reasons they're not going forward with the 8.2 isn't necessarily an inertia issue, so much as one of the things they're asked to do when they do the 8.2 is to sign the RSA. And one of the things in the RSA is language that talks about property rights and not having property rights, and so they're very concerned about basically giving up something that, granted, has just not been decided yet in court of law. So it's an undecided issue, and they're not interested in signing contracts that give away rights. And I'm wondering if, to kind of overcome this issue of having, to try to encourage legacy holders to go through the 8.2, whether there's been some thought as to how to encourage them to go through the process.
Good question. John's got it.
So the first thing to do is, if you haven't looked at the legacy RSA since it was issued, the RSA and legacy RSA earlier last year, we completely revised, and it's clearer in the rights that are provided and the rights that are disclaimed. And I would ask you, if you haven't looked at it in the last 6 months, you probably need to look at it again. Second point is that you can, if you're a successor organization, you can reclaim your organizational ID. We do require people to enter into an LRSA if they're going to be in a situation where they're not transferring an entire block. But it is possible to update your information in the ARIN registry as a legacy holder without signing an RSA. It depends on the exact circumstances. And so I guess it's not universal that you're going to have to sign an LRSA. You'll have to sign an LRSA when you finally do a transfer, because we need the indemnification portion of that. We're actually looking at that to see whether or not that's necessary. In some cases, if someone's transferring an entire block, we have instead had an indemnification and an officer letter because they're transferring the whole block. When they're done, there's no reason for them to have an RSA with us because they have no resources. So it's not universally true that you're going to end up signing an RSA if you're doing a transfer. And the RSA, the LRSA is actually much friendlier to rights. We incorporated many pages of comments from this community into the LRSA.
I actually I was looking at the RSA before I came up here, and maybe it's interpretation, but what I saw in Section 7 was that number of resources are not property, and the holder will not have or acquire any property rights. And I think that's language that in there that gives legacy holders pause.
Oh, that language is very clear. Section 2 outlines the rights you have. It does say you have the right to be assigned to the, you're associated with the block, you're the only one associated with the block, and you can transfer those rights to others, comma, in accordance with policy. None of that should be a problem. They're very clear rights, and they give you what you want, unless you intend to transfer contrary to policy. If that's your intent, I actually can't help you, but then neither can this room.
Hey, Adam.
Hello, I'm Adam Gosling from APNIC Secretariat. I don't have a question. This is more of a heads up. In our last meeting in Auckland, prior to that, we had a policy proposal regarding Whois data quality. It wasn't a very well-structured proposal, and the chairs decided not to progress it, so it wasn't presented. Instead, we ran a kind of consultation, a community discussion about this topic, about Whois data quality, and that will likely spawn a longer discussion between now and our next meeting in Bangladesh. And so if anyone who's kind of interested in this topic for the APNIC region, I'd encourage you to participate because you're all stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Folks, we are going to close the microphone soon, so approach the mics.
Louis?
Hi, Louis Lee, Google Fiber. I'm looking at my last validation email, and I would like to suggest that right between your introductory paragraphs and where it says your POC information, add a link. Why is validation important? And just point it to something that lists out why it's important, just like you presented just now.
That's good. Would you mind sending me a quick email to remind me of that, because I have bad memory?
Okay, I'll
Thank
just
you.
forward to this.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hi. Great, well pronounced. Thank you. Elizabeth van der Laan, ICANN board. In the European Union, there's a huge discussion about Whois and privacy, because some say that the current rules contradict our new data retention directive, and it's very hard for operators to figure out where they stand. They're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. I was just wondering whether you had the same discussion going on in this region and whether there are privacy violation concerns.
So in general, the number of resources are assigned to organizations. There are very small organizations, single doing business as, and et cetera. But we have a privacy policy that says that we do not provide information in the public Whois that goes all the way down to a street address for a very good reason. And that's because there's norms and standards in many countries that prevent that level of information. So already when you provide that level of information, it won't be reflected in the public Whois. And it's because some people who are a small organization are also an individual and should be entitled to that. We actually worked a Whois privacy policy for residential addresses back in 2007 or 8.
Mark?
Mark Lindsay, Avenue 4, and I wanted to follow up on the comment about the policy impediments for legacy holders to come forward to ARIN in a variety of circumstances. I concur with John that you can frequently achieve a transfer as a legacy holder without going through the RSA process. But the bigger problem I find in advising a lot of clients who are not necessarily transferring is they look at the body and say, I've got an entity that no longer exists as a legal entity, or I've acquired an entity. I go to ARIN and I want to reflect my current control issues, identify a new POC. They say, great, you're approved, looks like it's a great M&A. Now, by the way, sign this contract. That then gets elevated to the lawyers. They say, wait a minute, you're changing the legal status. Whatever it happens to be, it's murky, but you're changing my legal status, and I think I'm giving something up. And no in-house lawyer generally would give a thumbs up for them signing that contract. They had a choice. So a lot of legacy holders who aren't selling they have a choice of not signing. And a lot of them won't sign it, and the records will be inaccurate. And a lot of times, I've tried to advise clients to go back and get org recovery. And even when you go through that process, if the POC is invalid, org recovery, ARIN will ask them to sign an RSA. So you have the situation where you have a legacy holder who has an M&A activity. They want to have an accurate database registry. They've got to go through a process of converting their rights just to help the community have a more accurate record.
So I'd like to respond to that. I'm not sure what these legacy holders think they have, but they have only the right to use. They don't have ownership. This is not property.
I
And
disagree.
Actually, excuse me, it's very important that it not be considered property.
I disagree with you, but that's irrelevant because the point is you have large companies who are choosing not to come to you to update the database and introducing these problems for everybody because they believe like I do and not like you. But we both could be wrong, but that's not the point. The point is the externality is people, companies, large companies, are not coming to update the database because they perceive that they are losing something. Whether that perception is legit or not, it's a real fact that's introducing why 55% of the legacy holders don't have valid POCs. Not all of them are doing it that, but I know a fair number of legitimate Fortune 500 companies say, I'm not going to do it. It's not worth it.
To be clear, Mark, so to the extent that someone has a set of legal rights that aren't reflected in the RSA onto the IP address blocks, if they have those rights and we're not reflecting them, they can go to court and perfect those, okay? We don't interfere with that, and we cooperate with all court judgments in this area that are relevant. So the fact that someone may believe they have rights, I understand could be an impediment, but I can't really do something about someone's beliefs that aren't actually enforceable. Let me finish. So I want to be very clear. There are a lot of legacy holders who historically have not updated their contacts, allowed them to atrophy over time as a result. Some of that happened well before ARIN existed. And, but we're now in the situation where we're actually seeing the reverse. You'll see some stats coming up where the number of resources under RSA or LRSA is increasing, and the number not under any agreement is decreasing because the market is bringing those to bear. So if you're doing a transfer, yes, if you're doing a transfer and you're doing a partial transfer, and at the end of the day you're going to have number of resources and you wonder about the particular pedigree and the conditions under which you'll hold your remainder, I can understand some concern. But generally people are transferring the entire number of resource, and what they're getting is their payment. And so in those cases, they're actually not very concerned about signing the RSA. We have legacy holders coming in and doing it all the time because they're transferring them and then they don't care. The remnant language of the RSA doesn't get in their way because they don't hold number of resources at that point. So this problem is actually working itself out as is. What would be helpful is more education in the community about this. Go ahead.
No, so I'm with you, right? So yes, so the money incents people to get the lawyers out of the way periodically, right? So oftentimes that will drive people to say, I know you don't like this, I don't know what this RSA doesn't look good to you, but we're selling and you're going to have to hold your nose and go forward. That happens. There are certain situations where the money is enough of an incentive. But what I'm driving at is we do a lot of work that has nothing to do with transferring in a money exchange situation. It's trying to get those clients who've got the POC validation request email. They've got records that reflect an entity that they still own and control that no longer is a legal entity. They've got to go through a burden that is beneficial to everyone. And that burden should be reduced. It should be reduced and shouldn't be there because it's in our mutual goal to have those companies update the registry to be reflective, to minimize hijacking paths, to make the record more accurate, make the registry record more accurate. So what I'm driving at is we can have this policy discussion about property, not property, and the benefit of the RSA, but the real fact is legitimate companies with a lot of resource base are voluntarily choosing to keep the registry inaccurate because they don't want to overcome what they perceive as to be a burden.
Understood, and we recognize it's an issue. The counterpart is that without having there's some legal risk involved in recognizing a company that comes in and says, I have this chain of documents that show that these resources are should be under my control now. When ARIN has to go through the process of actually doing that change, if you're representing that customer who says, I need all this updated, you can see exactly why you don't want to have your rights encumbered by signing an RSA. I understand that. Hypothetically, if your customer isn't the rights holder, okay, then someone else is potentially impacted when we follow that chain of documents and update the registry contrary. We update in favor of you and your client against someone who might actually be the rightful rights holder. The RSA provides us important protections because we're doing this at your behest. Now, we are reviewing that, but it's very difficult for us to actually go through and change the organization, not a contact. We can update contacts all the time, but to change the organization assigned to resource without there being a legal agreement that provides indemnification, you're actually asking ARIN to risk the entire registry for your client's beliefs, okay?
I'm with you, and we'll take the rest at cocktail hour, but the last point I'll make on that is you have, that RSA is how many pages now? 16 pages, 19 pages?
Yeah.
How much of that do you need to address that point in the context of an M&A? I'd encourage you to focus that on the M&A transfers and not have the full 20 pages apply in that context.
Excellent point, and we are actually reviewing that same point. Okay, thank you, everyone. Any other questions for Leslie? I didn't get a chance to say I'm closing the mics, but I am closing them.
I think there's one.
Kevin, you got one more.
Kevin Bloomberg, I'll be 30 seconds. There are a number of organizations, banks, financial institutions that offer what I would consider a gold standard when it comes to locking down your data. CIRA, which is a very similar kind of registry for domain names, but not IP numbers, offers that level of service when it comes to locking down your assets. Is ARIN planning to do something similar?
You mean locking down a resource in dispute?
No, locking down the resources that, so my organization has a bunch of resources. I want to know that they are locked down and protected so I don't have to worry about what was just brought up here, which is the threat of, even if my POC is validated, somebody takes over my email account, whatever, I want it locked down offline in such a way that no transfers occur on my records.
We do not offer that presently. That's an excellent suggestion. Okay.
For the News Services Working Group.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any
Thanks
other
for your
questions?
attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.